myself all the things I love. Like I need a traffic jam to keep in touch. I can't focus on the words unless my hands are busy. I can't give up on the world or I will leave this city. And it's way too broad what I'm trying to say, but I write it down and let it go. And it's hard to know all the words I need to explain my heart in a single note.
Hello and welcome to the final ever, probably, book club. WayTooBroad, WayTooAbroad, but the final ever book club, the last episode of our WayTooAbroad summer book Club-o-Rama. Today we are finishing Ella Enchanted and I am going to cry. I apologize for the late upload. I got home much later than I expected from my trip to get my new tattoo on Saturday, so I wasn't able to record that night. Plus, I always expect I'll be like up for doing something else after I get a tattoo, but then I'm like exhausted. So, what are you gonna do? Quick update on what my obsession would be if we were doing obsessions these weeks, and this week it would be Muna's new album, which is also called Muna. It's very good. It opens up with Silk Chiffon. Hold on, let me tell you my faves real quick. Okay, Silk Chiffon is like all-time fave song. Not the all-time, but one of my all-time faves. So still a fave. What I Want is very good if I'm in the mood for it. Runner's High, great. Love to blast it in the car. Home by Now, very good. Kind of sad. Kind of Girl is like right in the middle of the album. It's song number 5, or towards the middle, and it's like there's all these like dance numbers. There's like a bunch of songs that are very poppy, and then Kind of Girl almost is like it's a nice calm like respite in the middle of the album, and also is like almost kind of country sounding, but the lead singer's voice sounds incredible on it, just like everything else, and I love it. Handle Me, I haven't warmed up to quite as much, but there's still time. I only started listening to it a couple days ago. No Idea, so good. Solid, so good. Anything But Me, excellent. Loose Garment, that has some very beautiful imagery in it. It's like a very flowy, soft song. I really like it. Shooting Star, also a great song. So like overall, just like hit rate is near 100%. Go check it out. Super gay. So now that we have covered that, let's jump in. So we're at chapter 25. Char has just confessed his love in a letter to Ella. And I didn't get any emails about what people think Ella should do about it. So I'm just going to jump in and tell you what she does do. I gaped at the page, read it again, and gaped again. In my daze, I noticed that my sooty thumb had left marks on the letter. He loved me. He'd loved me as long as he'd known me. I hadn't loved him as long, perhaps, but now I loved him equally well, or better. I loved his laugh, his handwriting, his steady gaze, his honorableness, his freckles, his appreciation of my jokes, his hands, his determination that I should know the worst of him. And most of all, shameful though it might be, I loved his love for me. Placing my candle carefully, I danced and whirled around my room. I could marry Char and live with my love. I could leave Mum Olga and her spawn. No one would give me orders. This was an unexpected solution to my trouble. Lucinda would have hated for me to evade my obedience by rising above it. And even Mandy would be surprised by this method of ending the curse. I extracted paper from the hiding place at the bottom of my wardrobe. My love shouldn't have an extra moment of impatience. However, my stub of a candle flickered out as soon as I wrote, "Dearest Char, darling Char, beloved Char." I ordered my mind to wake me the instant there was light enough to write by. Then I fell asleep composing my letter. In the middle of the night, I awoke, my happiness draining away. I wouldn't escape... Oh, sorry, I got very distracted. I wouldn't escape the curse by marrying Char. I would be more cursed than ever, and he would be cursed too. Suppose my obedience were discovered. My stepfamily knew and would take advantage... My stepfamily knew and would take advantage to improve their rank and fortune, but that would be the least of it. An enemy of Kyria could put the curse to more awful use. In unscrupulous hands, I would be a powerful tool. I could be made to reveal state secrets. I could even be forced to kill Char. And I had no doubt my secret would be discovered. In court, there would be eyes and ears that would be alive to such signs. I'd never manage to fool them all. Plus, like, she doesn't say this, but, like, Lucinda is a known quantity. Why am I so loud? I'm just going to lean back. I'm sorry if I was blowing out the mic at the beginning of this. I hope you were able to get through it okay. What could I do? Mother had ordered me not to tell anyone about the curse, but Mandy had countermanded the order, Mandy could countermand the order so I'd be able to tell Char. Then he could take precautions. I'd tell him. I'd wake Mandy now. I sat up in bed, happy again, and sank back. What precautions could Char take? He could prevent anyone from speaking to me or writing to me. He could shut me away. That might do. But he would have to bring me my meals, the flax to spin my clothes, the wood for my fire. It would be a burden similar to one of Lucinda's wedding gifts. And what would Kyria think of a hermit queen? And how would I feel, locked away like Rapunzel in her tower? Moreover, even the best precautions might fail. I could ask him to give up being crown prince in favor of his sister. If he were never to be king, he might not be a target. But how could I ask such a thing? How could he accept? And would the danger simply move to his sister? We could keep the marriage a secret. That was absurd. The secret would get out. I cast about for other ideas, but none came. Cursed, I couldn't marry him. But if I ever managed to break the curse, in a month or in 20 years, I would find him and win him over again if he was still free. No matter how long it took. But now, my only choice was to convince him to give me up. When I finally thought what to say and began to write, I ruined 3 sheets of paper by crying on them and a 4th because I forgot to misspell words. My dear Prince Charmant, your latest correspondence with my stepsister was received by my mother, Dame Olga, and myself. Ella and the cook Mandy were not here to accept it. She spelled accept wrong. Ella is absent because she has eloped, taking our cook with her. She left a note which I have enclosed for your perusal. You have been much deceived in her. It was her custom to read your letters aloud to us and crow over them, thinking it a feather in her cap to be writing to royalty such as yourself. For a while she had ambitions to be queen, but she despaired of it and took another offer. She would go into one of her dreadful rages if she knew the contents of your letter. I do not think she liked living on our generosity and longed to be able to lord it over us with greater splendor than we could hope for, although we fancy that our style is very fine. Style spelled wrong. Your letter arrived 4 days after her departure. I know because Demby had a ball that night, and Ella was greatly missed. Her beau turned to me for consolation, and I gave them the same advice. Beau, plural, I have for you. Think no more of the minx, because she has already forgotten you. I'm sorry to dismay you, but I hope you will be consoled by the fond wishes of this admirer. Your angel of comfort, Hattie. I didn't do the voice because I didn't feel like it, and also because it's not really her writing it, so. I tore a sheet of paper in half for the enclosure, written in my own hand. These are the first words I ever penned as a married lady. You know him, but I shall not write his name, only that he is very old and very rich and lives far from Frel, and he is fool enough to make me his bride. Some day, and the day may not be long in coming, I shall be sole mistress of a vast estate. I shall not write again, but look for me. When my husband dies, I shall visit Frel. Should you spy a carriage that surpasses all others, peer inside. You will find me within, smiling at my jewels and laughing at the world. Ella. Char's anger at his tutor would be nothing compared with this. He would hate me until the end of the world. In the morning, Mandy dispatched the correspondence, thinking it an ordinary letter. I didn't tell her about Char's proposal for fear she would think I should accept him. Although I knew I was right, I doubted I could withstand any argument. As soon as she left to post the letter, I collapsed in front of the fireplace, sobbing. When she returned in half an hour, I was still in tears. She gathered me in her arms. What's the trouble, sweet? For a few minutes, I continued to cry too hard to speak. When I was able to control myself, I told her. Did I do right? I asked at the end. Come with me, lady. She grabbed my hand and half dragged me to her room, passing several servants in the hall. Once there, she closed the door and turned to me. Lady, you did right. Now I'm going to do right, something I should have done long ago. Get behind the curtains, love. I hesitated, pushing back the urge to obey. Why? I'm going to settle scores with Lucinda. I want you to see me do it, but I don't want her to see you. I hid. Lucinda, I need you. The scent of lilacs filled the room. I stifled a gasp. I could see Lucinda's outline through the rough weave of the draperies. I never thought the day would come when the kitchen fairy would call me. I'm delighted. How can I help you, dear? Don't dear me, Mandy said. But you're right. I need your help. And I love to help. Safely hidden, I grimaced at her. I've been gathering my courage to ask you ever since the fairy ball. One only has to ask. Mandy sounded regretful. At the ball, I got into an argument with Kirby. You shouldn't have. I never argue. But I do, and it was about you. Kirby said we should suggest you try being a squirrel and try being obedient. If you gave it a fair trial, 3 months as a squirrel, 3 as an obedient human, you'd find out that your gifts aren't so wondrous after all. I don't have to try my gifts to know they're magnificent. That's what I said you'd say. There, I can tell Kirby I won the argument. I said you'd be too afraid you were wrong to put it to the test. Lucinda vanished. She must have been too angry at Mandy to continue the discussion. But then Mandy laughed. Don't forget to be obedient, little one. Here's a nice walnut. I'm sending you to a comfortable park. She paused. You can come out, lady. Did she really turn herself into a squirrel? I emerged cautiously. She did. Mandy was still laughing. Do you think she'll learn? If she doesn't, she's even more of a blockhead than I think. What if an animal eats her? If that happened, I'd fear for the animal, she chuckled. What a stomachache it would have. If she learns her lesson, will she undo all her gifts? I don't know. I just had to stop her mischief. You may yet break the curse yourself. But if she discovers how wrong she was, she'll want to lift the spell. Maybe. But it would be more big magic. Mandy drew me into a hug. Oh, love. I know what the spell does to you. I pushed out of her arms. You don't know. And how can you warn against big magic when you just summoned Lucinda? Nothing one fairy does to another is big magic, lady. Stop calling me lady. You used to call mother that. Now you're a lady, too. If you put yourself first and married the prince, someone would have come along to harm him and Kyria as sure as cabbages. You're a heroine, sweet. I'd rather be his wife. The tears welled up again, and I threw myself across Mandy's bed. She sat next to me, stroking my back and murmuring, Oh, sweet, my lady, perhaps it will come right. She shifted her weight. Something crackled, and she exclaimed, What's this? Oh, I forgot. When I posted your letter, there was one for you. She pulled a letter out of her apron pocket. I flew up. It's not in the prince's hand, love. It was from father, saying he wouldn't come home. My servitude pained him, but not enough to return him to the arms of his odious, though beloved wife. He wrote, When I find a husband for you who is rich enough to satisfy me, you will be released from my Olga. Until then, I urge you to be, as always, my stalwart daughter. Fucker. I fell back on the bed, laughing wildly. My father would make my letter to Char come true. He would marry me off to an ancient man who would soon die and leave me enormously wealthy. The irony! I couldn't catch my breath. Tears ran down my face, and I didn't know whether I was laughing or crying. Mandy held me until I quieted. While she rocked me, I thought that Lucinda might still save me. Mandy might be wrong. Once Lucinda knew how it was to be obedient, she wouldn't be able to leave me cursed. She'd have to help me. A week later, I saw in my magic book that Char had received my message. I opened to an illustration in which he was burning my letters. I was glad to see his image, no matter what the image was doing. After I gazed a while and ran my fingers over his shape, I turned the page and found an entry in his journal. I've lost nothing. She never was what I thought her, so I've lost nothing. I'm only fortunate, and Kyria is blessed, that she eloped before my letter reached her. When I received the message from her sister, I thought it had to be a ploy to make me hate Ella, and I resolved not to be taken in. For a while, I considered leaving Eortha to discover the truth. Gradually, however, I realized the truth was in my hands. Hold on. The sister could have no reason to lie to me. If Ella and I had married, she would only gain. But Ella's note convinced me in the end. It was in her hand, and the last phrase about smiling at her jewels and laughing at the world was certainly her own. She charmed me as easily as she did the ogres. I never did discover why she hid after her father's wedding. She was probably avoiding a lovesick swain not wealthy enough or ancient enough to suit her. Her avoidance of me after the wedding was another trick, the meaning of which is too deep for me to fathom. But her letters were the greatest deception of all. She seemed so good-hearted. But I suppose that's the way with such women. They wouldn't be minxes if they weren't masters of artifice and fraud. How she must have laughed when I confessed my faults to her. There was more. In addition to minx, he called me flirt, harpy, siren, enchantress, temptress, and even monster. He ended by writing, I wish I weren't Neortha. The silence here offers too much time for thought. 1,000 times a day I swear to never think of her. At least I can promise never to write or speak of her again. And I can force my pen and my voice to keep my word. I endured 6 months of Hattie and Olive and Mum Olga by imagining my freedom when Lucinda released me from the curse. I didn't give up writing to Char. Since the new letters were never posted, I told him the truth about my life in Mum Olga's household. When Hattie told me that this Earl or this Duke loved her, I laughed over the absurdity of it to him. When Olive made me count her money again, he was informed. Every day she invents new hiding places for her wealth. There are coins in the hem of her gown, coins sewn into her sash, and coins buried in the stuffing of her waist roll. With all the metal concealed about her person, she had best not set foot on a boat. When Mama Olga had me clean out the root cellar, and I found a tabby with her litter of kittens, Char learned of my delight. And when Mandy taught me cooking secrets, I shared them with him. I also described my future without the curse. My first act, I wrote, will be to confess that I love you. I'll beg pardon 1,000 times for causing you unhappiness, and make reparations by making you laugh 1,000 times. The night before Lucinda's reappearance, Hattie awakened me when she returned from a cotillion. She said I had to help her prepare for bed. I had never had to before, so I waited to learn her real reason. Tonight they talked of nothing but Prince Charmant's return next month, she began while I undressed her. I knew exactly when he was coming home, so why was my heart beating so? They say that King Gerald is going to hold 3 royal balls to welcome him. They say the prince will pick his wife at the balls. Ouch, be careful. I had stabbed her with a stay. For once, it was accidental. Mama says if I didn't hear any more. Were the balls Char's idea? Did he really mean to find his bride there? Had he forgotten me? Could I make him remember when Lucinda freed me? Hattie dismissed me eventually, and I spent the hours till dawn imagining my release from the curse and thinking about my reunion with Char. I couldn't decide whether I should steal one of Mum Olga's horses and ride to Aortha to surprise him, or whether I should wait and amaze him at the balls. In the morning, I woke Mandy and tried to convince her to feign illness so she could call Lucinda immediately. But no, first we had to prepare Mum Olga's breakfast and wash all the dishes, and Mandy wouldn't use the smallest magic to speed the process. When we were through at last, Mandy and I repaired to her room, and I hid as before. This time the room didn't fill with the scent of lilacs when Lucinda arrived. From my hiding place behind the curtains, I heard a rustling noise and then the sound of weeping. "Stop sniveling," Mandy said. The weeping became louder, more despairing. "I can't." The music and lilt were gone from Lucinda's voice. I heard panting as she fought to catch her breath. "But if I were still obedient," she puffed, "I would have to stop crying just because you told me to." More sobs. "What did I bring on those poor innocent people? How could I have done big magic? And so carelessly." "Your gifts weren't a boon?" I'd never heard Mandy be sarcastic before. "They were dreadful, terrible," Lucinda wailed. I wondered if her experiences had been at all like mine. "What happened?" Mandy asked, her voice kinder. "It was much worse to be obedient, but being a squirrel was bad enough. Half the time I was cold and wet, and I was always hungry. I never got a decent night's sleep because I was too cramped, curling up in knotholes. Once an eagle carried me off. I was only saved because it flew into a violent storm and dropped me over a tree." "And when you were obedient?" "I turned myself into the 8-year-old daughter of shopkeepers. I thought it would be only fair to be a child, since I always bestow obedience on infants. I suppose my parents meant well, but they insisted I eat the most awful food, and I had to go to bed before I was sleepy. My parents wouldn't let me disagree with them about anything. My father loved to read parables aloud, and I had to listen to every word. I had to listen to every word. They commanded me to think about the morals, and even my thoughts had to be obedient. And all this I suffered at the hands of good people who loved me. If anything had happened to them, I shudder to think what would have become of me." "You won't bestow any more gifts then?" "Never. I wish I could take them all back." I stepped out from behind the curtain, even though I'd promised I wouldn't. "Please do take them back." That's the end of chapter 25. We're rolling right into chapter 26. Lucinda gasped. I gasped too. She wasn't Lucinda. Or was she? The enormous eyes were the same, but not the height. This fairy was stooped with age, and her perfect skin was wrinkled, with a mole next to her nose. I was seeing the real Lucinda, unshielded by magic. "Mandy, who is this? You brought a human to spy on me?" She straightened for a moment, and I saw a hint of the young, beautiful Lucinda. Then she sighed. "You look familiar. Are you one of my victims?" This was my chance. The chance for the freedom I always should have had. The chance to escape from my stepfamily. The chance to win Char back. But I was so nervous my voice was gone. I could only nod. "What did I do to you, child?" she whispered, as though afraid of the answer. I found my voice. "You made me obedient. Now you know how it is." "I do, child." She touched my cheek, and my heart rose. "But I can't help you. I renounced big magic." "Oh, lady," I pleaded, "it would be a wondrous gift. I would be so grateful." "Ella," Mandy warned. "Mandy, don't you think, just this once?" Lucinda shook her head, and wispy gray curls fluttered. No, I mustn't. But if you ever have need of small magic, call on me. You only have to say the words, Lucinda, come to my aid. She kissed my forehead. I remember you now. I thought you only spoke Aorthan. I begged her. I told her about my circumstances. I wept. She wept with me, sobbed harder than I did, but stood firm. I pleaded with Mandy to persuade her, but Mandy refused. I can't, lady, she said. It was big magic to cast the spell in the first place, but it would be big magic to undo it too. Who can guess what would come of it? Only good would come of it. Only good. I can't bear this, Lucinda wailed, wringing her hands dramatically. I can't bear your distress. Farewell, child. She vanished. Why is that not big magic? Come on. I stormed out of Mandy's room and rushed to the library where I could be alone, where no one was likely to make me scour anything or sew anything or say anything. Now I couldn't go to the balls. Hattie and Olive would go with Mum Olga. They'd be free to dance with Char, and so would every other young lady in Frel, and some lass would win him over. His nature was loving, and he'd find someone to love. As for me, I'd be lucky to glimpse him on the street. He wouldn't recognize me. My dirty servant's garb would rule out identification at a distance, and he'd never be close enough to see my face. I could neither go to the balls nor escape from them. Hattie and Mum Olga talked of nothing else. Even Olive was interested to the extent of worrying about her gown. Sew it with gold thread, she instructed her maid. Shouldn't I be as fine as Hattie? Shouldn't I be as fine as both of them? I cooked and scrubbed and waited on them in a fury. For 2 weeks I wouldn't speak to Mandy. The only sound in the kitchen came from pots and pans as I slammed them down. Then it came to me. Why couldn't I go? Char needn't know I was there. Everyone would be masked, at the beginning at least, although most would unmask quickly so he could admire their beauty. I never would. I'd see him, but he wouldn't see me. Where was the harm if he didn't recognize me? I decided to do it. I would fill my eyes with him. If I could approach him safely, I'd fill my ears. If anyone questioned me, I wouldn't be Ella. I'd invent a new name. I'd be content in his presence. Nothing more. I'd have to be careful of Hattie and Olive and Mum Olga. They probably wouldn't recognize me in a mask and an elegant gown, but I'd do well to keep away from them, especially from Hattie. I made up with Mandy and told her my plan. She didn't comment on the risk I'd be taking, only asked, Sweet, why go and break your heart again? I guess it's decided now that I'm never going to go through one episode of this book club without having to cut out 1,000 burps. So my heart was still broken. I would see Char and it would mend. I'd leave him, it would break again. There were 3 balls. It would break 3 times. I'd grown tall enough to wear mother's gowns. Mandy chose the best 3 and altered them in keeping with the current fashion, even adding a graceful train that would follow me everywhere. Small magic, she said. She also found the mask I'd worn at Father's wedding, white with tiny white beads along its edge. I feel like he would recognize that. In the days preceding the ball, if there were moments when Char and the balls weren't in my mind, they were when I was asleep. Awake, I'd picture myself, radiantly beautiful, mounting the palace steps. I'd be late, and the whole court would be there already. An old servant would mutter, At last, a damsel worthy of our prince. People would turn to stare, and a sigh of envy or appreciation would rustle through the assembly. Char would hurry to... I wouldn't allow him to see me. The old servant might approve me, but I would slip in unnoticed by anyone else. Within, noblemen in my proximity would beg me to dance. I'd oblige them, and the steps would carry me near Char. He'd see me and wonder who I was. After the dance, he'd attempt to find me, but I'd elude him. The next time he'd see me, I'd be in the arms of another partner. I'd smile at the stranger, and Char's heart would be touched. My thoughts were nonsense. I would see Char and be invisible to him. Perhaps I'd see him fall in love with another maiden. At night, I searched my magic book for illustrations of Char or anything written by him, but the book fell open to pages written in Aorthan, written by Areta in her diary. I read eagerly. She wrote, The inn has never had such important guests before. Prince Charmant and his knights... Oh my god. Slow down. Prince Charmant and his knight stayed here last night. Mother was so nervous she backed into the trestle table while curtsying. It went over, and Anepe's vase smashed into 100 pieces. Mother, father, I, Allo, Flimsu, Isti, and even Etime went down on our knees, picking up shards so the prince wouldn't step on something sharp. It was so crowded on the floor I bumped into someone's shoulder. When I turned to apologize, I was face to face with the prince, who was crawling about with the rest of us. He insisted on paying for the vase. He said it never would have happened if not for him. Then he apologized for knocking into me. I couldn't answer him. The words wouldn't come. I could only nod and smile and hope I didn't seem too much of a bumpkin. At dinner, when I brought his ale, I did manage to speak, perhaps because I truly had a question, not simply a wish to impress. I told him I'd been at finishing school when Ella ran away, and I asked if he knew whether she was safe. When I said her name, one of the knights called out, "The ogre tamer! Whatever happened to her?" The prince was quiet for so long after my question that I worried I'd offended him. But when he spoke, he didn't seem angry. "You were her friend?" he asked. "You liked her?" I told him Ella was the best friend I ever had. He paused again, and I feared he would say she had died. But he finally answered that he believed her to be well and married to a rich gentleman. He added, "She is happy, I think. She is rich, so she is happy." Without thinking, I blurted, "Ella doesn't care about riches." Then I realized I contradicted a prince. "How do you know?" he said. I answered, "At school, everyone hated me because I wasn't wealthy and because I spoke with an accent. She was the only one who was kind." "Perhaps she's changed," he said. "I don't think so, Your Highness." I contradicted him twice. That was the end of our conversation, and I shall remember it forever. I watched him all evening before and after we talked. Before, he had talked and joked with his men. After, he spoke no more. Married? How could it be? I wish I could see her again. I wished I could see Arita. I think I say her name differently every time. I apologize. It's spelled like this, Areida. I think I said Arieta and Arita and maybe Areta. You tell me. What do you think it is? Leave a voicemail. I wished I could have seen Char's face when she defended me, but no illustrations accompanied her journal. December 12th, the day of the first ball, dawned clear and mild, but by noon clouds had gathered and the wind had become sharp and cold. My gowns hung in Mandy's wardrobe. The glass slippers Char and I had found were safely buried at the bottom of my carpet bag. Since they'd been hidden under my petticoats, there was little likelihood that Char would see, and they'd be hidden under my petticoats, there was little likelihood that Char would see and identify them. Hattie's preparations began after breakfast and continued endlessly. "It's not tight enough, Ella. Pull harder." "Will that do?" My fingers were striped red and white from tugging at her laces. If she could still breathe, I wasn't to blame. "Let me see." She curtsied at herself in the mirror and rose, panting and smiling. "I shall be desolate if you don't remember me, Prince," she cooed at her reflection. Then she spoke over her shoulder. "Am I not magnificent, Ella? Don't you wish you could look as I do and go to the ball?" "Magnificent, ravishing. Yes, I wish I could." Anything to make her go. "Pearls would set my hair off to advantage. Fetch them, there's a good girl." 2 hours later, after Mama Olga called her 3 times and threatened to leave without her, she declared herself perfect and departed. At last I was free to bathe and dress. Instead of the kitchen soap I usually used, I helped myself to Hattie's store of bath oils and fragrant soaps. Mandy produced a fleecy towel and a fine scrub brush. "Tonight I'll be your lady in waiting," she said, pouring steaming water into the tub. "When your servant is your fairy godmother, you're never scalded and your water never gets cold. You become sparkling clean, but the water never gets dirty." I soaked away a year of cinders and grime and Mum Olga's orders and Hattie's edicts and Olive's demands. When I rose from the bath and stepped into the robe Mandy held for me, I was no longer a scullery maid, but the equal of anyone at Char's ball. My gown was a spring green embroidered with leaves of darker green and plump yellow buds. Mandy had done her work well. In accordance with the latest fashion, my waist tapered to a narrow point, and my train trailed 2 feet behind me. In the glass, I saw Mandy curtsy. There's really pretty illustrations online of all 3 of these gowns, if anyone is interested. I think that the first one, the one I just described, is the one that was on the original cover of the book. It's really like deep green and pretty. But yeah, there's nice illustrations of all 3. If you Google around, you can find them. I'm not going to look them up, sorry. "You're lovely, lady." She seemed close to tears. I hugged her. She squeezed me tight, and I inhaled the sweet smell of freshly baked bread. I turned back to the glass and raised my mask, which covered most of my forehead and half of my cheeks, with small holes for my eyes. With half my head hidden and my mouth appeared strange and unknown, even to me. The transformation was thorough. With the mask, I was not Ella. Nor was I perfectly dressed. I had no jewels. My throat was unfashionably bare. But it would have to do. I didn't have to be the most elegant creature at the ball. I only had to see Char. When I ran down to our front door, I discovered that icy rain was falling in sheets. If I walked the quarter mile to the castle, I would be soaked. I could go to the ball without jewels, but not wet through and shivering. "Mandy, what can I do?" "Oh, sweet. You can stay home." I knew there would be 2 more balls and that it probably wouldn't sleet tomorrow, but it might. and I had set my heart on going tonight. Isn't there some small magic, a fairy umbrella, something that would keep me dry? No, love, not small magic. The weather was such a stupid thing to separate me from Char. Mandy hadn't made the rain, but she could have ended it. I wish you were a real fairy, one who wasn't afraid to do anything. I had a mad idea and acted on it without considering its wisdom. I said the words Lucinda had taught me. Lucinda, come to my aid. If anyone would think keeping me dry wasn't big magic, that one would be Lucinda. Ella, Mandy protested. Don't. The order came too late. Lucinda appeared between us. She still looked old, but she stood straighter than the last time I'd seen her, and many of her wrinkles had disappeared. Ah, sweet child, you need my help, she smiled, and the young Lucinda shone through. So long as it's not too big, I shall do what I can. I explained. Going to a ball? Like that? No, it won't do. She touched my neck, and it was hung so heavy with jewels that it took all my finishing school training to keep my head up. Mandy snorted. Perhaps it's too much for small magic, Lucinda agreed. The weight vanished, replaced by a thin silver chain from which hung a white lily made of the same kind of glass as my slippers. I felt a slight pressure on my head. I lifted off a tiara fashioned as a garland of the same flowers. The jewelry in this book, I want to own all of it. It sounds so beautiful to me. It's beautiful, is what Ella said too. Lucinda replaced it on my hair. Now you need a coach. That shouldn't be too troublesome. How can you call a coach small magic? Mandy demanded. And horses and a coachman and footman? People and animals. You've forgotten your lesson. No, I haven't. I won't shape them from the air. I'll form them out of real things. That should satisfy your scruples, Mandy dear. Mandy grunted, which I knew was not agreement, but Lucinda continued gaily. Earlier this evening in Frel, I spied a giant's cart filled with pumpkins. An orange coach would be splendid. A rumbling noise reached us. Outside, a mass darker than the storm took shape and grew larger. A 7-foot-high pumpkin rolled towards us and came to rest in the street outside the manor. I watched Lucinda. She muttered no incantations, waved no wand. For a moment, her gaze shifted, and she seemed to stare within, not out. Then she winked at me. Look, child. The pumpkin had been transformed into a gleaming coach with brass door handles and windows through which lacy curtains peeked. Mice will make plump horses, she said. 6 fat brown mice raced across the tiles of the hall. They vanished, and 6 horses appeared before the coach. A white rat became the coachman, and 6 lizards were transformed into footmen. They're wonderful, I said. Thank you. She beamed. Mandy glowered. Anything can happen, you idiot. What can happen? I'll make it safer. Ella, child, you'll have to leave the ball early. At midnight, your coach will become a pumpkin again, and the animals will regain their original shape until your next ball. The tiara and necklace will disappear. I would have only 3 hours with Char. They would have to be enough. Ah, how glorious to be young and going to a ball. Lucinda vanished. Glorious, yes, to see Char, nothing more. Goodbye, Mandy, I said. Wait, she ran to the kitchen. I stood impatiently and gazed outside. As I watched, an orange carpet unfurled itself and rolled from the coach's door to ours. If I waited much longer, it would be wet and useless. Mandy returned with her umbrella, uncompromisingly black and with 2 bent spokes. Here, love, I hope you won't be sorry. I won't hug you and muss your dress. She kissed me. Go now. I stepped onto the carpet and raised the umbrella. The coachman jumped down from his perch and opened the carriage door. So here we're getting right into the meat of this being based on Cinderella. You can see many echoes of the original Cinderella story. I think it's neat that they've set up like actual kind of logic to why Ella has this limitation time-wise from the original book story. It was just like, oh, the magic runs out at midnight. Like, why? But now it's like on purpose because one fairy is annoyed with another one. Does that make more sense? I don't know. I think it does. Anyway, here's chapter 27. A few guests were still arriving when my carriage reached the castle. Before I emerged, I made certain my mask was securely tied. I'd been here before, as a week-old infant brought to meet my sovereign, but not since. The hall was twice as tall as Mum Olga's. Every wall was covered with tapestries, hunting scenes, court scenes, pastoral scenes. Along the wall to my right and to my left, a line of marble pillars marched to the end of the hall. I tried not to gape. Soon I'd be counting windows. Mistress, a young squire offered me a glass of wine. It was delightful not to be a servant. The prince is greeting his guests. There's a queue. He waved at a file of courtiers, mostly women, that wound from the huge double doors to the prince. A small figure at the far reach of the hall. Most of the women had already unmasked, so Char would be sure to see their lovely eyes or classical noses. God damn. The squire added, "They're each scheming to make the prince propose marriage on the spot." He bowed. "Dance with me, lady. The line will wait." An order. A group of musicians played near the prince, and perhaps a dozen guests danced. "With pleasure," I said, pitching my voice With pleasure, I said, pitching my voice a tone lower than usual. Well, now she's pitched her voice right around where I pitch all the men's voices, so you'll just have to try to work through it. My eyes kept straying from my partner. Char smiled at each guest, bowed, nodded, spoke. Once he laughed. Making him laugh had been my domain. The damsel who caused the laughter was of middle height, slender, with blonde, wavy hair cascading to her waist. She had removed her mask, but her back was turned, so I couldn't see her face. Hattie and Olive and Mum Olga weren't in line. They were probably off eating somewhere, but Hattie would certainly return soon. She wouldn't leave a room for long while Char occupied it. My dance ended as the clock struck the 10:15. "Thank you," I said. "No squire can hold a lady's attention tonight." He left me. Just over 2 hours remained. I retired to a chair at the edge of the hall, as close to Char as I dared. 3 gentlemen asked me to dance, but I declined each invitation. I became simply a pair of eyes, staring through my mask at Char. I needed no ears because I was too far off to hear his voice, no words because I was too distant for speech, and no thoughts, those I saved for later. He bent his head. I loved the hairs on the nape of his neck. He moved his lips. I admired their changing shape. He clasped a hand. I blessed his fingers. Once the power of my gaze drew his eyes. I looked away quickly and noticed Hattie, hovering a few feet beyond the line, her lips clenched in a fawning smile. He spoke to the last guest. Last but one. My resolution to be unseen gave way. The last in line would be me. I rose and hurried to reach him before Hattie could pounce. I curtsied. He bowed. When we both straightened, I found I had grown closer to his height. "What's your name, lady?" He smiled politely. I found my voice with difficulty. "Layla." We were silent. Do you live here in Frel, Lady Layla?" "In Bast, Highness." I was doing it very low. I'm sorry. I named a town near the Elves Forest. He looked past me, ready to move on. "I hope you enjoy the ball and your stay in Frel." I absolutely does not say that. I couldn't let him go. "Abensa ahudo, iseni imi esete urebu amufa." I spoke with a heavy Kyrian accent. "You speak Aorthian." His attention was captured. "Not well. My uncle was born there. He's a singer. His voice can charm wood." Char's smile was genuine now. "I miss their songs. I was glad to leave, but now I miss everything." I hummed a stanza of Areda's favorite song, a sad one, about a farmer whose family is starving. Char joined me, singing softly. Near us, heads turned. I saw Hattie frown with her smile still frozen in place. When we finished, he bowed again. "Would you favor me with a dance?" Over all the others, I was his choice. I curtsied, and he took my hand. Our hands knew each other. Char looked at me, startled. "Have we met before, lady?" "I've never left Bast, but I've longed to see Frel my whole life." He nodded. The clock struck 11. The dance was a gavotte, too spirited for talk. Rapid movement was a relief in the midst of so much feeling. We flew through the hall, perfectly in step. Char smiled at me. I smiled back, happy. We separated. I twined arms with a succession of momentary partners, dukes, earls, knights, squires, and back to Char. A final whirl, and the dance ended. "I love a gavotte," I said, touching to make sure my mask was still properly in place. The rush, the sweep, the whoosh. What nonsense was I talking? "It's the same with stair rails, the same feeling," he said. "Do you like to slide?" His voice was eager. Oh boy. "Stair rails? Did he suspect me?" I forced a sigh. "No, Majesty. I'm terrified of heights." Oh, his polite tone had returned. There's so much stair rail talk in this book. Does he have some kind of fetish? I'm not judging. Do you? Do I what? Like to slide down stair rails? Oh, yes. I used to. I wish I could enjoy it. This fear of heights is an affliction. He nodded, a show of sympathy, but not much interest. I was losing him. Especially, I added, as I've grown taller. He stared. Then he laughed in surprised delight. I was a fool for behaving so much like myself. The clock struck the half hour. Char started. 11:30. I've neglected my guests. He became the courteous host again. "Refreshments are in the next room if you care to partake of them." He waved at an archway. Then, I'll look for you later. He hoped to see me again. Layla, that is. I hurried out of the hall. Outside, the sleet had stopped. The pumpkin coach glistened in a line of black carriages. I climbed in. When we arrived at home, the coachman handed me out, remounted, and flicked his whip. The horses started off. In the morning, Hattie told me about her share in the ball, bidding me to sit on a low stool while the family ate their breakfast. He danced with me, Hattie said, her teeth stained purple from a blueberry muffin, and only good manners prevented him from spending the rest of the evening at my side. When will you pay me? Olive asked. Must I pay? Aren't you glad you danced with the prince? You said you'd give me 3 coins for every time he couldn't dance with anyone else because of me. You owe me, she thought, 8 coins. How many times did he dance with you? I asked. 3 times. I asked him 4 times, but the last time he said he had to see to his other guests. I vowed not to approach Char during the second ball. It was too dangerous. The evening was clear, but Lucinda provided the coach anyway. My tiara and pendant were pink roses. My gown was a silvery blue with a pale purple petticoat. Tonight there was no receiving line. I searched for a seat where I'd have a clear view of the dance, and where others would have a poor view of me. I found one in a recess partially blocked by a giant fern in a stone pot. I scrutinized Char's dancing partners, although I knew I had no right to resent a rival. He danced 3 times with the yellow-haired wench who'd made him laugh the night before. She wore no mask and was lovely. I couldn't leave him to her. The clock struck the half-hour. Soon it would be 11. I checked my mask, then left my hiding place and stood with the others who observed the dance. Char saw me. Over the shoulder of his partner, he mouthed, "Wait for me." I grew roots. An earthquake could not have moved me. The clock struck 11:15. It struck 11. If it had struck the end of the world, I'd have stayed as I was. The final figure ended, and he came to me. "Will you dance?" he asked. I looked for you. Did I have time? I accepted his arm, and we stepped into the dance, a slow saraband. I was here all the while. I watched you. What did you see? An excellent host who had little real enjoyment in the ball, except when he danced with the blonde beauty. That part she didn't say aloud. Was it so apparent? It was to me. He changed the subject. Will you be here tomorrow? My father has asked me to perform an Aorthan song. When will you sing? Before midnight, please. Sometime late, he grinned. If I'm lucky, many of my guests will have gone. They needn't all hear their future ruler disgrace himself. There'll be no disgrace, not if you were taught in Aortha. What will you sing? A homecoming song. He sang in my ear. God. Oak, granite, these are the lyrics. I don't know the tune. Oak, granite, lilies by the road. Remember me? I remember you. Clouds brushing clover hills. Remember me? Sister, child grown tall. Remember me? I remember you. The dance ended and he stopped. There's more. I want you to hear it. Will you? I resolved to stay late the next night. I'd managed to reach home without Lucinda's gifts, even if I had to swim. I'll be delighted to, but I must leave now tonight. I'm expected by 12. How close to midnight was it now? He would think it odd if my jewelry vanished. Oh, I'd hoped... I'm sorry. I mustn't. He bowed. I curtsied. Till tomorrow, Majesty. One last thing. He caught my hand. Please call me Char. Sweetheart. Okay, chapter 28. I don't know how you guys are feeling right now. I know that I'm very highly primed to get a lot of feelings from this book, but like I always just feel so much for both of them in this situation. And like Ella's making so many mistakes. But my heart just goes out to her every time. I've read this book 1,000 times. Okay, chapter 28. I rode home calling myself adult, but rejoicing nonetheless. In the room, I opened my magic book to see if it would show me anything about the ball or Char's thoughts. There was nothing. The next morning, I tried again and found an entry in his journal from the night before. How dare she, that fright, Hattie, rushed at me the instant Layla left. Some wenches will stoop to anything to intrigue a man, she said. I should be devastated if I had to wear a mask in order to be interesting. She warned me the mask might conceal anything, a deformity, advancing age, the face of a known bandit. If I were sovereign, she said, I would order her to remove her mask. Sus. I wanted to reply, if you were sovereign, every Kyrian would wish you'd don one. Certainly I've wondered why Layla hides her face, but it may be the custom in Bast. If she is a bandit, she's courageous to come to court. More likely, she is disfigured. Maybe she has a scar, or one eyelid droops, or her nose is a mottled purple. I don't care. I'm pleased to have found a friend at these balls, where I expected to find only tedium. Does Layla want more than friendship? Why did I write that name? Oh, so when he wrote that last sentence, does Layla want more than friendship? He first wrote Ella and crossed it out. So it says, does Ella Layla, but Ella's crossed out. Why did I write that name? Did she come to these balls as every other maiden did, hoping to wed a prince? No matter what I am like, so long as I am a prince. I confess, I do wish to see her face. I turned the page and found a reckoning from Olive to Hattie. You owe me 6 KJs. I danced with him 2 TO times when WEN you were eating EETING. Pommy. In the afternoon, I slipped out of the manor to the greenhouse near the menagerie. There I picked daisies and wove the flowers into a garland to replace Lucinda's tiara. If I was to stay at the ball after midnight, I couldn't wear Lucinda's jewels. My gown for the last ball was my favorite. White with a low neckline edged in lace. The skirt parted in the front to reveal a petticoat with 3 lace flounces. I love the word flounces. In back, my skirt was tied with a large bow that flowed into the graceful sweep of my train. I faced myself in the mirror and began to set the garland in my hair, but Mandy stopped me. Here's something better, love. She handed me 2 packages wrapped in tissue paper. Open them. There were a tiara of woven silver leaves and a silver chain on which hung an aster made of lapis. Oh, Mandy. I bought them at the market. They won't disappear at midnight. She placed the tiara on my hair and fastened the chain around my neck. You make them beautiful, sweet. I looked in the mirror. Mandy's selections added something that Lucinda's creations hadn't. Here we go. Just right for my gown and just right for me. I'm like tearing up. I've cried sooner than this when I've read this book before. For the record, I did pretty good. Okay. Char was waiting for me at the palace entrance. When the carriage drove up, he dashed to help me out before the coachman could step down. The clock struck 8:30, the beginning of the last ball. You look splendid, he said, bowing. I was touched by his gallantry, since he believed me disfigured. As we went inside, he said, Your carriage is an unusual color. Not in Bast. If you knew much about Bast, I was in for trouble, unless orange coaches were common there. He took my arm. May I visit you there? Bast would be honored. And you? I'd be honored too. If I'm going to visit your family, you should meet mine. I'll be delighted someday. Now is a good time. They're nearby, you're nearby. Now? King Gerald? He chuckled. That's who my father is. But he's kind to everyone except ogres. You needn't worry. The king rose when we entered. I curtsied, blushing for my rudeness and wearing a mask before him. When I rose, he was beaming at Char. Queen Daria was smiling too. I'd seen them many times, but never so close. The queen had a wide face, perfect for broad smiles. An honest face. Char resembled his father, but softened a bit. The king's face was severe in repose, although merry now. Mother, father, may I introduce Lady Layla, my new friend and acquaintance from Basque, where the carriages are orange. Lady Layla, King Gerald took my hand. He had the roundest, deepest voice I've ever heard. Welcome to Frel. Most welcome, Queen Daria embraced me. I've waited long to meet the maiden my son loves. I don't love her, mother. That is, I like her, certainly. Over the queen's shoulder, I saw Char looking silly with embarrassment. Queen Daria held me away from her and searched my face. I can't tell through the mask, but you remind me of a lady I admired. She had the most playful spirit I ever knew. She added so only I could hear, if you are like her, then Char has chosen well. Oh boy. She released me, and I stepped away, dazed. I was certain she had meant mother. Lady Layla is proof I haven't been polite and distant to everyone, Char said. Excellent proof, King Gerald answered. Bring along more proof and we'll be convinced. He frowned at my mask. We should return to my guests, Char said hastily. As we left, I heard Queen Daria say, I don't remember any orange coaches in Bast. Back in the hall, Char asked me to save a dance for him later. Just now, I better be polite and distant some more. I didn't want him to go. Every instant of our final evening was too precious to lose, even one. But I nodded and he left me. I watched the dance and turned down partners. Mistress, Hattie stood before me, simpering. I wanted to catch you alone, my dear. I am Lady Hattie, daughter of Dame Olga. Layla had no reason to hate Hattie. I'm happy to meet another Frelin. Charmant says you live in Bast. No one called him Charmant. She proceeded to pump me about my family and circumstances, pressing me until I said, I hadn't thought it was the custom here to interrogate visitors. I apologize, but one has to be so careful when one's connected to royalty. You see, Charmant and I have an understanding. We are secretly engaged. Had she gone mad to speak such a falsehood? To protect him, I must ask you to remove your mask. I must see what lies beneath. Thank heaven she had not ordered. You may ask, but I shall not oblige. Good evening, Lady Hattie. I turned and began to walk away. Layla, there you are. Char was back. Now dance with me, he said. Your prince commands you to. I want to spend the rest of the ball with you. He bowed to Hattie, standing a few feet away. Excuse us. I curtsied, reveling in her fury. They are all asking about you, he said, pulling me close as the dance required. Who is this mysterious stranger, they say? The maiden who wears a mask. Why? He stopped himself and changed subjects, speaking of court affairs. I wondered how many more dances we'd have. The clock chimed 9:30. In a few hours, Layla would be gone forever. I'd never be so close to Char again. Despite a fierce struggle, I began to cry. He might not have seen because of the mask, but a tear coursed down my cheek. Layla, I'm so sorry. There was so much remorse in his voice that I was startled. Why? What were you saying? I'm the one to apologize. I wasn't listening. I was thinking how sad I'll be to leave Frel. I laughed a little. No more balls every night. But you can come back, can't you? I suppose. But it won't be the same. You can never go back to a moment when you were happy. That's true. The dance ended. Would you like to go outside? Every time the musicians start up, I'm reminded of all the maidens with whom I should be dancing. Outdoors, we strolled through the castle gardens while I kept listening for chimes. How much time had passed? How much was left? Char spoke of Frel, asking whether I visited this site or that, and describing each one for me. I must have answered him reasonably when I had to, but if called upon to repeat what I said or what he said, I couldn't. Most of my mind and all of my heart were set on the sound of his voice, the warmth of his arm in mine, the rhythm of our steps together, the fresh scent of the night air, and on the wish that each minute would last a year. I cried again, but in the dark he didn't see, and the clock moved relentlessly on. 10, half after, 11, half after. That's enough, he said finally. I can face them now. Inside we danced again. Soon it will be time for me to sing, and after that I'll either be surrounded by worshipping music lovers or shunned by all. Surrounded, I said, and I would never shun you. I wonder. You may shun me if you know the truth. He took a breath and was suddenly quite formal. I apologize if I unintentionally raised your expectations, but I've resolved never to marry. So the balls hadn't been his idea. I stifled a triumphant laugh. You don't mislead me. I've only been saving stories for home. I'll tell them, the prince said thus and so to me, and I said thus and so back to him. And mother, I made him laugh. I made our prince laugh. And father, he danced with me, one night with almost no one except me. What did he wear, my sister will want to know. Did he have his sword with him always, father will ask. Char tightened his hold on my waist. Marriage is supposed to be forever, but friendship can be forever too. Will you? I felt something at the back of my head. Hattie, dancing nearby with the Earl of Denby, snatched off my mask. I let go of Char and covered my face with my hands, but not quickly enough. That's the end of chapter 28. Our girl has been discovered. Chapter 29. Ella! Hattie shrieked. Char gasped. Ella? I broke away from him and began to run as the clock struck midnight. Char would have caught me in a moment, but Hattie must have held him somehow. Outside, a huge pumpkin stood uselessly in the line of carriages. I continued to flee. A white rat skittered across my path. Somewhere I lost one of my slippers. I ran on, listening for pursuers. At home, maybe Mandy would know what to do, or I'd hide in the cellar, in the stable, somewhere. How could I have gone to the balls? I put Char and Kyria in such danger. Mandy! I shouted as soon as I reached the manor. A servant stared at me. I ran into the kitchen. I've endangered Char again, and Kyria. What can I do? Pack your things, Mandy said as soon as she understood my rushed explanation. Where shall I go? I'll come with you. We'll find work as cooks. Hurry. Can't you pack for us by magic? She'd done it before. It was just small magic. Nothing is small magic in a moment like this. Go. Fairies! I raced to my room and began to throw things into my carpet bag. I had little. It would be the work of a minute. I heard the door open downstairs. There were voices. We never managed to leave. I tore off my ball gown and donned my tattered servant's wear, rubbing the sooty skirt across my face. Over my hair, I tied a ragged length of linen. Nancy appeared at my door. It's the prince. He wants to see everyone. I didn't move. She giggled nervously. He won't eat us. At least I hope not. Come. I followed her, and my heart drumming loud enough to drown out all thought. He stood in the hall with his knights and our entire household. In the midst of all that was more important, I hated him to see me covered in rags and cinders. She said cinders. Cinderzella. Oh, yeah, there's another part, I think. I stationed myself behind the tallest manservant, but Char and the knights walked among us. Straining for a new disguise of servant or simpleton, I sucked on my fists and stared about vacantly. Sir Stephen found me. Here's a maid, he said. Come, lass. He took my hand and pulled me to Char. Ella, why are you dressed so? Your Majesty, I was about to deny my name, but Hattie spoke for me. That's only Cinders, the scullery maid, she said. Sire, would you care for refreshment now you're here? She's a scullery maid? A scullery maid, of no account, but our cook Mandy has cakes fit for a prince. The door wasn't far. Sir Stephen held my hand. I pulled, but couldn't break away. Lass, Char said to me, I won't hurt you, no matter what. He cupped his hand under my chin and tilted my face up to his. I wanted to catch his hand and kiss it. As soon as we touched, I knew he recognized me. He brought my slipper out from his cloak. It belonged to Ella and will fit her alone, whether she's a scullery maid or a duchess. A chair was brought. I wished for normal-sized feet. That's my slipper, Hattie said. It's been missing for years. Your feet are too big, Olive blurted. Try it, Char told Hattie. I lost it because it kept falling off. She sat and removed her own slipper. I caught the familiar smell of her feet. She couldn't wedge her toes in. I'm younger than Hattie, Olive said, so my feet are smaller. Probably. They were bigger. Now it was my turn. Char knelt, holding the slipper. I extended my foot and he guided it. The slipper fit perfectly, of course. What was I going to do? His face was close to mine. He must have seen my terror. You needn't be, Ella, if you don't want to be, he said softly. He was so good. That's a line in the book, but I agree. I'm not, I said. But in spite of myself, tears streamed down my cheeks. I saw hope spread across his face. That letter was rubbish, a trick. He glared at Hattie, then turned to me. His look probing. Do you love me? He still spoke softly. Tell me. An order. I do. I was sobbing and smiling at once. How was I going to give him up again? Char was jubilant. His voice rang out. His voice rang out. Then marry me. Another order. I nodded and continued to weep, but my hand found its way into his. Don't marry him, Ella, Hattie commanded, giving my name away for once and all. I withdrew my hand. I can't, I said. Perhaps Hattie would save us. Hattie, don't be a fool, Mum Olga snapped. Don't you want to be stepsister to the Queen and make her give you whatever you like? She smiled at me. His Highness is kind enough to want to marry you, Ella, my sweet. It had begun. The curse would make Hattie and Mum Olga as grand as they wanted to be, and it would provide endless wealth for Olive. Char was looking at me with such gladness, and I loved him so. I was the cause of his joy and would be the cause of his destruction. A secret delivered to his enemies, a letter written in my own hand, a covert signal given by me, poison in his glass, a dagger in his ribs, a fall from a parapet. Marry me, Ella, he said again, the order a whisper now. Say you'll marry me. Anyone else could have said yes or no. This wasn't a royal command. Char probably had no idea he'd given an order. But I had to obey, wanted to obey, hated to harm him, wanted to marry him. I would destroy my love and my land. They were in danger and no one could rescue them. We were all doomed, all cursed. Char was too precious to hurt, too precious to lose, too precious to betray, too precious to marry, too precious to kill, too precious to obey. Words rose in me, filled my mouth, pushed against my lips. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I love you. Yes, yes, yes. That's not in quotes. She didn't say that out loud. I swallowed, forcing them down, but they tore at my throat. A strangled noise erupted from me, but not words, not consent. I knew this would happen. He put a hand on my shoulder. I must have frightened him, but I couldn't see his face. My vision had turned inward where the battle raged. I heard Lucinda's voice. My gift to Ella is obedience. She will always be obedient. I saw Mandy telling me to eat my birthday cake. I saw Seif leering at me and heard him. No need to be persuasive with this one. It'd cook itself if we told it to. I saw Olive counting my coins. Mum Olga standing over me while I scrubbed the courtyard. Hattie wearing mother's necklace. I'd eaten the cake. I'd drunk the tonic. Given up the necklace. Slaved for my stepmother. Let Olive suck me dry. They'd gotten all they wanted of me, but they weren't going to get Char. Never. Never. Be obedient. Marry him. Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. The tears streaming from my eyes were acid, burning my cheeks. My mouth filled with liquid, bile, and blood from biting my tongue, salty and corrosive and sweet. In spite of myself, my mouth opened. Consent had won. Obedience had won. But I clamped my hand over my mouth. My yes was stillborn. I remembered Char at Mother's funeral, waiting for me while I wept, grieving for Mother too. I heard his promise at the menagerie, and soon I shall catch a centaur and give it to you. I saw him binding Seif's ankles. I saw him, buttonless doublet flapping, bowing to Father after we'd flown down the stair rails. I saw the ball and King Gerald's beaming at his son, the hope and future of Kyria. Say yes and be happy. Say yes and live. Obey. Marry him. Those little interludes are like separate little paragraphs. I began to rock in my chair. Forward, the words were about to come. Back, I reeled them in, faster and faster. The legs of the chair thudded on the tiles and pounded in my ears. Marry him. I won't. Marry him. I won't. Then I lost sense of all of it. I went on rocking and crying, but my thoughts burrowed within, concentrated in a point deep in my chest where there was room for only one truth. I must save Char. For a moment, I rested inside myself. Safe, secure, certain, gaining strength. In that moment, I found a power beyond any I'd had before, a will and a determination I would never have needed if not for Lucinda, a fortitude I hadn't been able to find for a lesser cause. And I found my voice. No, I shouted. I won't marry you. I won't do it. No one can force me. I swallowed and wiped my mouth on my filthy sleeve. I leaped up, ready to defy anyone. Who would force you? Char sounded shocked. No matter who, I won't. I won't. They can't make me. No one can make me. I won't marry you. Olive said. She'll marry you. You told her to. She has to listen. She laughed. Marry him and give me your money. I won't. Stop ordering me to. I was still shouting, invigorated. I wanted to march, waving banners. Char would not die because of me. Char would live. Live and prosper. She doesn't have to marry me, he said. Hush, Olive, Hattie said. Ella, go to your room. His Majesty can have no further need of you. Char said, I have great need of her. Hush, Hattie, I said, intoxicated with my success. I don't want to go to my room. Everyone must know I shan't marry the prince. I ran to the door to our street, opened it, and called out into the night, I shan't marry the prince. I turned back into the hall and ran to Char and threw my arms about his neck. I shan't marry you. I kissed his cheek. He was safe from me. He turned my head and kissed me on the mouth. The kiss swept through me, and I clung to him, trembling. From behind me, Hattie shrilled, Go to your room this instant! I command you! I ignored her, but Char pulled away. Why won't you marry me? Why not if you love me? I'm cursed. You wouldn't be safe if I were your wife. What was I saying? I hadn't told anyone about the curse since I was 8. Mother had forbidden it. Had someone told me to? No one had. Then why? My thoughts wouldn't settle. Oh, I'm a mess. Oh. I wasn't going to marry Char, that was certain. He looked so handsome, smiling from our kiss, then frowning in confusion, a smudge of my soot on his nose. I wiped it off. Saving him made him more mine than ever. Could my refusal mean the spell was broken? Could it? I took stock of myself. I did feel different, larger, fuller, more complete, no longer divided against myself, compulsion to comply against wish to refuse. Larger but lighter, much lighter, a burden shed, a massive burden. I defied Olive's command as well as Char's, and Hattie had sent me to my room, but I was still here. I had told my secret, but I felt no dizziness, no pain. You're free. The curse is over, love. Mandy was at my side, hugging me. God damn, I'm sorry, you guys. You rescued yourself when you rescued the prince. I'm that proud and glad, sweet, I could shout. There's like 1 page left, and it's going to take me 1,000 years. When I had my old copy of the book that I read like 1,000,000 times, this last page spread had literal holes in it from me crying at this part. So I'm doing my best. I had been able to break the curse myself. I had to have reason enough, love enough to do it, to find the will and the strength. My safety from the ogres hadn't been enough. Zolf's rescue hadn't been enough, especially not with guards about. My slavery to Mum Olga hadn't been enough. Kyria was enough. Char was enough. And there's a whole epilogue too, guys. Oh my god. If you could only hear all the nose blowing that I was cutting out too. Now it was over. Ended forever. I was made anew. Ella. Just Ella. Not Ella the slave. Not a scullery maid. Not Layla. Not Eleanor. Ella. Myself unto myself. One. Me. I tore off the rag that covered my hair. Then I curtsied to Char. When you asked for my hand a few minutes ago, I was still too young to marry. I looked up at him and saw a smile start. I'm older now, so much older that not only can I marry, but I can beg you to marry me. I knelt and took his hand. He didn't let me kneel before him. He pulled me up and kissed me again. I took that to signify his consent. That's the end of the book. But there's still an epilogue, as I said, so I'm going to read that. It's just a few pages. I'm a mess. I'm going to cry when I edit this, too. I guarantee it. Hey, quick update from Editing Hannah here. Yes, I absolutely did cry when I was editing this. Also, I forgot to mention that in the movie that we all hate now equally, I hope, the way that Ella broke the curse, I have talked about this on the podcast before, but like now that you have this scene to compare it to, the way that Ella broke the curse was that it was the same deal. She didn't want to consent. No, it wasn't even. I'm sorry. The evil uncle they made up for the movie, ordered her to kill Char, and he was like kissing her and confessing his love in a hall of mirrors to her in the palace. And then he went to hug her, and she had like a dagger and behind his back. And so she looked at herself in one of the mirrors, in the hall of mirrors, and she said, "You will no longer be obedient." And she ordered herself to not be obedient anymore. And that's how she broke the curse. And that fucking worked. So you tell me which one you think is better, unless you think that the movie version is better, in which case you can fuck off. In a month, we married. For the ceremony, I wore my first new gown in a year and mother's necklace, which I reclaimed from Hattie. After my deception had been explained to them, King Gerald and Queen Daria welcomed me joyously into... I said quing. What if they were called quings? King Gerald and Queen Daria welcomed me joyously into the royal family. My stepfamily was not invited to the wedding and had to celebrate, if they wished, in the streets with the rest of Frau. Father was invited, but he was traveling and didn't receive the invitation until too late. Areta did attend. We renewed our friendship and swore to visit each other often, an oath we've kept faithfully. All the exotic peoples, except ogres, were represented at the ceremony. Sladen gave us a new pottery piece by Agulon, an elf child embracing a tree. Sataf and Zulf were there. Zulf still a toddler, since gnomes grow more slowly than humans. That's the little gnome kid that she saved at the beginning of the story. Uaxi, the giant, came too and was responsible for keeping our animal guest Apple from galloping the length of the palace hall. Although we didn't invite Lucinda, she arrived anyway with a gift. "No need," Char and I chimed together. "Remember when you were a squirrel," Mandy said. But the gift was what Father would have called a fairy trifle. It was a box no larger than my thumbnail, which grew or shrank to accommodate whatever it was called upon to hold. Wonderfully useful and not harmful at all. We thanked Lucinda enthusiastically until she glowed with pleasure. In time, Hattie became reconciled to our marriage and used her connection to us to her best advantage. She never married, but Olive did. A garrulous widower fell in love with her unwavering attention. When she'd demand that he talk to her, he'd tell her about his triumphs, his enemies, his opinions on everything. She wasn't anxious to wed. In exchange for her consent, he paid her 20 kJs every day and served a white cake with every meal. Father and Mama Olga continued to love at a distance. After my marriage, he became successful again, trading on the respect commanded by the royal family. Char watched over him and intervened when necessary to save him or his victims from the consequences of his chicanery. Mandy lived with us as a cook and godmother of our children, and secret performer of small magic to protect us from colds, broken crockery, and the sundry inconveniences of a royal household. Nancy lived at the palace too, and commanded a legion of servants, several of whom were in charge of polishing stair rails for their sliding monarchs. I refused to become a princess, but adopted the titles of court linguist and cook's helper. I also refused to stay at home when Char traveled, and learned every language and dialect that came our way. When we left the children behind, my magic book kept us informed of their doings. We got one more paragraph and one more sentence, guys. We can do it. Decisions were a delight after the curse. I loved having the power to say yes or no, and refusing anything was a special pleasure. My contrariness kept Char laughing, and his goodness kept me in love. So, with laughter and love, we lived happily ever after. The end. Ugh. Folks, what's not to love? Come on, tell me. Don't. If you didn't like it, don't tell me. But if you did like it, let me know. Sorry if I made you cry with my crying. But maybe you would have cried anyway. How can you possibly know? I hope that you all have a wonderful week. We will most likely, I know the schedules are still a little bit funky next week, because I'm finally going on vacation. But we're planning on having an episode out next weekend, so keep an eye out for that. We'll let you know, like, on Twitter if that changes. Thanks everybody who has been on this journey with me for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought, if you liked it. Yeah, I just simply fucking love it. I just love it so much. It fills my heart. So, yeah, that's it. Have a wonderful week. Love you all. Bye.
Fine time to shine a little vice and a little bit of sitting down to the bit of the vice. Ding down to the little bit of hey. Touch silent and the bottom of the night at the fire night and the night. Touch silent and the bottom of the night.